The snow had been falling for 6 hours when she stopped walking. Not from exhaustion, though she was exhausted, and not from cold, though the cold had moved past discomfort into something more fundamental, something that felt less like temperature and more like a decision the mountain was making about her. She stopped because the lantern went out. She stood in the dark on a road that was no longer distinguishable from the land on either side of it, with a carpet bag in each hand and a wedding dress still on underneath her coat, because there had been no time and nowhere private to remove it. And she understood, with the particular clarity that comes when every other option has been eliminated, that she was going to die here if she did not find shelter in the next hour. Then she saw the light in the trees. If this story already has you, subscribe to this channel right now and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Stay with me, because what brought Hannah Voss to that road in the Montana mountains in January of 1879, and what she finds at the end of it, is going to matter in ways neither of them can see yet. The morning had begun as most disasters do. Unremarkably, Hannah Voss had risen at 5:30 in the boarding house in Billings, dressed carefully, eaten nothing because her stomach would not allow it, and walked to the church on Clement Street, where a man named Gerald Pratt was supposed to be waiting. He was there. He looked at her when she came through the door, and then he looked away, and then he looked back. And the look the second time was the look that Hannah had been afraid of since the moment the arrangement was made. The look that said he had been hoping the agency photograph was inaccurate, and had just confirmed that it was not. She was a large woman. She had always been a large woman, built broad and solid and capable in the way of women whose bodies had been asked to do real work from an early age, and no corset in existence was going to change the fundamental arithmetic of her frame. Gerald Pratt took the minister aside. The minister looked uncomfortable. Gerald Pratt did not look uncomfortable. He looked relieved, in the way of a man who has found a reason to do what he already wanted to do. He offered her $20 for her trouble. She did not take it. She walked out of the church still in her wedding dress, and she did not cry until she was around the corner and certain no one could see. And then she cried for exactly 4 minutes. She counted, because she had learned that grief needed a limit, or it would not stop. And then she picked up her carpet bags and she thought about what came next. What came next was the auction. It was not called an auction. The man running it, a dry, impersonal agent from the Matrimonial Bureau, called it a reassignment of contract, which amounted to the same thing. There were 6 men in the room. 5 of them looked at her, and then at their hands. The 6th was a large, dark-haired man in the back, who had come in late and stood with his arms crossed and his hat on, and the expression of someone who had arrived expecting something else entirely and was now recalculating. The agent said, "Contract available, experienced in household management, good health, reassignment fee negotiable." He said it in the tone of a man describing livestock. The first man offered nothing. The second offered $2, then withdrew it when the third man laughed. The third man offered $1. He was smiling when he said it. No one else spoke. Hannah stood at the front of the room in her wedding dress and looked at the wall above everyone's heads, and she did not move her face. She had learned early that a face in motion gave people information they would use against you, and she had no information left to spare. The man in the back said, "Done." He paid the $1 in coin. He signed the paper. He looked at her for the first time directly, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything that could be described as warm. His name, she learned from the agent, was Cormac Riley. He ran a trapline and a small cabin in the mountains above Billings, which he described as comfortable in the way that men describe things that are not comfortable, but that they have grown accustomed to. He had a wagon outside. He said he would take her things. He did not explain why he had come to the bureau in the first place, and she did not ask. They rode in silence for 3 hours, until the snow started. It came down fast and with intention, the way Montana snow comes in January when it has been holding off for days and has run out of patience. The horse was steady, but the road became a negotiation, and somewhere in the pass between 2 ridges, a wheel found a hidden rut and cracked on the axle, and Cormac Riley said one word under his breath and climbed down to look at the damage in the way of a man confirming what he already knows. "Can it be fixed?" she asked. "Not tonight." He straightened. His breath came in white bursts. "Cabin's a mile up, maybe a mile and a half." He looked at her and at the snow. "I can carry what's necessary. You can leave the rest." She looked at her 2 carpet bags, which held everything she owned. She picked both of them up. "I'll manage," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he took the heavier bag from her hand without argument and started up the road, and she followed, and the snow came down around them both. He got ahead of her in the dark. She understood it was not intentional. His legs were longer, and he knew the road. But the lantern went out in the wind, and she stopped. And by the time she found the light from his cabin window, she was alone, and the cold had moved all the way in. And when she knocked on the door, her hands were no longer entirely hers. He opened it. He looked at her face, and then at her hands, and he said nothing, but he stepped back, and she came inside. The cabin was 1 room. It was small and low-ceilinged and smelled of pine resin and wood smoke, and the particular density of a space that one person has occupied alone for a very long time. A fire burned in the stone hearth, large and serious, and a cast-iron pot hung above it that contained something that had been cooking since morning by the smell of it. There was a table, 2 chairs, a workbench along the far wall strung with traps and tools, a shelf of provisions, and a bed in the corner that was the only bed there was. She set her bag down. She could not feel her fingers. He crossed to the hearth, and without ceremony he took her hands in both of his and held them near the fire. His hands were enormous, scarred across the knuckles, warm in the way of hands that had been working outdoors and then come inside to warmth. He did not look at her face while he did this. He looked at her hands. "Can you feel them?" he said. Not a question. Exactly. "Starting to," she said. He held them another minute. Then he let go and went to the shelf and got a tin cup and ladled something from the pot and handed it to her. Venison broth, thick and dark, with the smell of sage and something else she could not name, but that hit the back of her throat like the memory of being warm. She drank it without speaking. It was the first thing she had eaten since the day before. He watched her finish it, and then took the cup and refilled it without asking, and she drank the second one more slowly, her hands warming around the tin, and the fire worked on the cold in her coat, and the cold in her bones, and the cold that was not either of those things but that had been living in her chest since 11 o'clock that morning on Clement Street in Billings. She was still in the wedding dress. The coat covered most of it, but the hem showed, white and incongruous in the firelight, slightly damp at the edge from the snow. He had noticed it. He had been carefully not mentioning it. "There are clothes in that trunk," he said, indicating a wooden chest along the wall. "They were my sister's. She's in Oregon now. She won't mind." Hannah looked at the trunk. "Thank you," she said. He took himself to the far end of the cabin, all of 9 feet away, and turned his back with the deliberateness of a man giving what privacy the room allowed. And she changed out of the wedding dress in the firelight, her back to his back, and folded the dress and put it in her carpet bag and buttoned herself into a gray wool dress that was slightly too short, but warm, that smelled of cedar from the trunk and of a woman she had never met who had thought the dress worth keeping. When she turned around, he was stirring the pot. Sit, he said. There's more. She sat. He gave her a full plate this time. Venison in the broth, roasted root vegetables, hard bread that tasted better than it looked. She ate all of it. He ate across from her in silence, and the fire worked, and outside the snow pressed on the cabin walls as though it had a personal interest in the proceedings. She noticed no second chair had been pulled up for her. There had been 2 chairs at the table when she came in. He had simply assumed, from the first moment, that she would sit. That was something. She looked at the walls while she ate, the workbench, the traps, the tools hanging in order, a rifle on a peg, a row of tins on the shelf, labeled in a careful hand, a small stack of books. She could not read the spines from where she sat, but there were more of them than she expected in a trapper's cabin, 7 or 8 at least, worn at the edges. She looked at the books and then at the man eating across from her, and she revised something in her preliminary accounting of him. "Why did you come to the bureau?" she said. He ate a bite of bread. "The winters are long," he said. It was not a complete answer. She understood it was all she was going to get tonight, and she accepted it the way she accepted most things, without drama, and with the knowledge that patience, applied consistently, was the only tool that worked on everything. "I'll earn my place," she said. "I can cook, preserve, keep records. I know doctoring to a sufficient degree. I don't complain, and I don't require much." He looked at her across the table. His eyes were very dark, and he looked at things in the way of a man who spent most of his time outdoors, assessing terrain. "I didn't buy you so you could earn your place," he said. "I bought you so those men in that room couldn't." The fire moved in the hearth. She looked at him. "They were laughing," he said. It was the most words he had strung together since they met. His voice had gone level in the way of a voice recalling a thing that had made it want to be anything but level. When that man put in his dollar. They were laughing. She said nothing. "That's not a reason for a person to be sold," he said. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked back at her plate because there were things happening in her face that she had not decided to put there, and she needed a moment to decide. "No," she said, "it is not." He cleared the plates. She moved to the chair by the fire because the table was done and the chair was closer to the warmth, and she sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the fire and listened to the snow, and felt, for the first time in 16 hours, that she was not required to do anything except exist. The sensation was so unfamiliar as to be almost uncomfortable. She stayed in it anyway. It was well past midnight when the sound came. She heard it before he did. A low sound from the lean-to on the north side of the cabin, where he kept the animals through winter. Something wrong in the rhythm of it, a heaving, irregular quality that she recognized without knowing how she recognized it. She was on her feet before she had finished the thought. "The animal in your lean-to," she said. She was already moving toward her coat. "Something is wrong." He was up. He got the lantern and she got the door, and they went out together into the snow, which had slowed to something merely serious rather than catastrophic, and in the lean-to they found the mule, a gray, solid-bodied animal named Patience. She would learn later, which he had named with the optimism of a man who had been regularly disappointed in the early and difficult stages of a colic that, left unattended, would kill her before morning. Hannah had seen it once, on her uncle's farm in Ohio. She had been 12. "Have you got oil?" she said, "and warm water, and rope?" He looked at her. "I know what to do," she said. "Get me the oil." He got the oil. He got the warm water. He held the lantern, and then he held the mule's head, and then he did every specific thing Hannah Voss told him to do, in the order she told him to do it. for the next 4.5 hours. She worked in the gray dress in the freezing lean with her sleeves pushed up, and her hair coming down, and her hands sure and deliberate, and without hesitation, because the animal needed someone to be certain, and she was the most certain person in the room. He did not doubt her. He did not ask questions she had not invited. He watched her hands the way a person watches someone perform something difficult, and does it with a growing, involuntary attention that has stopped being about the task. At 4:30 in the morning, the mule stood, shaky and not fully herself, but standing. Hannah leaned against the lean-to-wall and let out a breath that had been waiting some time. Cormac Riley was looking at her. He had been looking at her for the last hour in a way that was different from the bureau, different from the table, different from any of the ways he had looked at her since Billings. He was looking at her the way a man looks when a calculation he thought he understood has returned an answer he did not expect, and he is still working out what to do with it. "She'll need watching," Hannah said, "for the next several hours. The crisis is past, but it can return." "I'll stay," he said. "We'll stay," she said. He brought blankets from the cabin. He brought the rest of the bread and a second tin of broth. Cold now, but better than nothing. They sat on opposite sides of the mule in the hay, with the lantern between them and the snow gone quiet outside, and the animal breathing in the steady way of something that has been pulled back from an edge and does not know it. He said, "After a while, you've done that before." "Once," she said. "I was 12. My uncle's mare. He walked me through it." "Once," he said. "It was enough to remember," she said. He was quiet. "I remember most things I learned," she said. "I had to. No one was going to teach me twice." He looked at the lantern. Then he looked at her. "Who decided you were worth $1? He said. It was not Gerald Pratt he was asking about. It was the question underneath Gerald Pratt and the bureau and the laughing men and the agency photograph and every room in her life where someone had looked at her and revised their estimate downward. She thought about answering around it. She thought about all the ways a woman learns to take up less than she requires. "Everyone," she said. "For a long time. They were wrong," he said. The mule breathed. The lantern burned. Outside, the dark was beginning to show at its edges the particular gray that announces morning before morning arrives, the sky deciding, slowly, to change. Hannah Voss looked at Cormac Riley across the lantern light, his scarred hands and his dark eyes and the 7 books on his shelf and the 2 chairs at his table and the $1 he had paid in coin so that no one else could pay it laughing. And she felt something move in her chest that she had not felt in long enough, that she had begun to wonder if she was capable of it anymore. She did not say anything. She had learned to be careful with things she was not certain of. But she did not look away. Spring came early to that part of Montana, or early by comparison to the years preceding. The snow was off the pass by the 2nd week of March, and the road down to Billings was passable by the time the first wagon came through in April. They heard about Gerald Pratt through Holt, the Billings dry goods man who made the mountain rounds twice a year and knew everything that happened in every county, because knowing things was the only way he had found to make a trip worth the bother. Pratt, it turned out, had applied to the same matrimonial bureau a second time, 6 weeks after refusing Hannah, and had been matched with a woman from St. Louis who had arrived by rail in February and lasted 11 days before writing to her brother, who had come by horse with considerable purpose. And there had been. Holt reported with the relish of a man delivering genuinely satisfying news. A scene in the street in front of the assay office that had required the intervention of the sheriff and the lasting reassessment of Gerald Pratt's standing in Billings society. Hannah was kneading bread when Holt told the story at the kitchen table. She did not stop kneading. "And the woman?" she said. "Back in St. Louis," Holt said. "Good riddance to Billings," she wrote her brother. And Pratt. "Good for her," Hannah said. Holt looked at her and then at Cormac, who was at the workbench, not pretending to work on a trap. "You look well," Holt told Hannah, in the tone of a man who had heard a different story going into this visit and was revising it in real time. "I am well," she said. She put the bread in the Dutch oven. She was not a woman who required anyone to confirm what she already knew about herself. But she registered his revision the way she registered most things, accurately and without ceremony. It was Cormac who walked Holt to his wagon when the visit was done, and what passed between them out of earshot of the cabin was between those two men. What Holt carried back to Billings, and what spread from Billings outward in the way that true things spread when they are more interesting than the version people expected, was this: that the woman the Bureau had sold for $1 to a mountain man was running a clean kitchen and a sound set of accounts, and had saved a mule from colic in a blizzard with her bare hands on her first night in the mountains, and that the mountain man, who had not been known to speak warmly about anything in recent memory, had been heard to refer to her, twice, as his wife. Not the Bureau woman, not the arrangement, his wife. With a particular weight on the word that the men who heard it understood meant he was not discussing terms. The wedding they performed themselves, in the cabin, in May, when the first wildflowers were up on the south-facing slope and the mule was fully recovered and the road was clear, and Hannah had no intention of going anywhere on it. The minister from the valley came up the following month and made it official, and he stayed for supper. Because the supper was worth the ride. What Hannah Voss brought to that mountain was not what anyone in Billings would have thought to list. Not what the Bureau agent had been selling. Not what Gerald Pratt had been looking for. Not what the man with the laughing dollar had thought he was bidding on. She brought a cast-iron competence that did not announce itself. She brought the knowledge of how to put up preserves and set a broken bone and balance an account and read a sick animal's distress in the rhythm of its breathing. She brought 7 years of learning to stand in rooms that had already decided about her, and to stand there anyway, and to do the work in front of her without waiting to be recognized for it, because recognition was a thing that came or did not, and the work was there regardless. She brought, though she had not intended to, and would not have predicted it in January of 1879 in a cold bureau room with a laughing man and a $1 coin, the understanding that a person's worth is not set by the highest bid or the lowest. It is set by what they do with what they are given, in the hours when no one is watching, in the frozen dark of a lean to when an animal needs to live and living requires someone willing. Cormac Raleigh had paid $1 for her. By the end of that winter he would not have taken the mountain for her. He told her so. One morning in June, standing at the edge of the south slope where the wildflowers had come up thick and the sky was the particular blue it gets at altitude when the air has been washed clean by the last of the cold. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without ornamentation, looking directly at her so there was no question of his meaning. She looked at the flowers. She looked at him. "I know," she said. She had known since the lean-to. She had simply waited for him to catch up. The dollar that Gerald Pratt's associate had laughed when he spent was in the tin on the shelf above the window, between the jar of dried sage and the stack of books she had read her way through over the winter and was reading again. Cormac had put it there on the morning after the colic. Without explanation, the way he did everything that mattered, quietly, with his back half turned, as though the gesture required no audience to be real. It was not a keepsake. It was not a joke. It was evidence of what a woman is worth when the measure is taken by someone paying attention. She was home. She had been home since the night the lantern went out on a mountain road, and she saw a light in the trees and walked toward it. Because walking toward light in the dark is what a woman does when she has decided that she is not, in fact, finished. She was not finished. She had barely begun.